Hello and welcome to Virtual Boys, and welcome to all of the Virtua Fighters. You may know I do a series on the channel called All of the Street Fighters, where I've looked at almost all of the Street Fighter games in existence, and I wanted to do another one because I've been enjoying it so much, and all of the Street Fighters are still happening, still going on every Thursday. But I really wanted to look at Virtua Fighter. It's one of the two things that the channel's named after. The logo is completely ripped off the Virtua Fighter logo. It's the Virtua Fighter font. I love Virtua Fighter. There's nowhere near as many games in the series as there are Street Fighter games, so it's going to be a much shorter series. Maybe a little less frequent, might not be weekly, but there's only like 6 mainline games, so I'll probably knock through them fairly fast. But yeah, Virtua Fighter. This is the very first Virtua Fighter that we're looking at. Released in 1993, I believe, in arcades on Sega's AM2 hardware. This is the Sega Saturn version we're looking at because I don't have access to the arcade version. Let's have a quick look in the options, just see if there's anything completely unusual. You've got your sound test and your voice test and your music test, as always. But no. So 2 options here, arcade and versus. Simple game. So this is our character roster. 8 characters in the first Virtua Fighter. We've got Akira, we've got Pai, we've got Lau, yeah. Wolf, who you better recognise from the AJPW game, and Jeffrey. Kage, who everyone refers to as Cage. Sarah and Jackie, who are brother and sister. So Akira is our Ryu. Every fighting game's got a Ryu, and in Virtua Fighter it's Akira. He even looks like him. And yeah, we're gonna start fighting Jackie. So Virtua Fighter is a 3-button fighting game. It was actually just to throw a big factoid in straight away. It was the first 3D polygonal fighting game. Virtua Fighter was, and it kind of looks like it. The graphics on this original Virtua Fighter are incredibly primitive. And we'll see instantly, as soon as we look at another Virtua Fighter, you'll see the improvement. Like, this first game it wasn't a test, but it was really basic. It was, it's got a similar look to Virtua Racing. If you've ever seen Virtua Racing, Sega's other game, they're flat shaded polygons, hardly any textures going on at all. Very, very basic 2D backgrounds. But yeah, they improved it almost instantly. And when we get to Virtua Fighter 2, which is actually in a couple of videos, it's not the next one. But when you get to Virtua Fighter 2, the leap is just unbelievable. It's off the charts. But anyway, Virtua Fighter is a 3-button game. So different fighting games have different kind of combinations. Street Fighter is famously a 6-button game. You've got 3 punches and 3 kicks. Virtua Fighter is much more simple than that. It's got a punch, it's got a kick, and it's got a guard. Like a lot of games, if you press punch and guard together, you'll do a grab. So there is one other combination. But at its basics, it's a 3-button game. It's also got no magic, no spells. So there's a bit of a joke of the Street Fighter series. Is Ryu a wizard? Because he throws fireballs and hovers in the air. But the magical fireball stuff and. I'm trying to think of another example that isn't a fireball. Like doing a huge uppercut where you're on fire and you set your opponent on fire. Virtua Fighter doesn't have any of that. I guess the fact that they call it Virtua Fighter, they're going for this more realistic thing. Although your characters do kind of fly through the air. The jumps, there's one. The jumps in Virtua Fighter 1 are absolutely ridiculous, and they rein them in future ones. But they're this really slow leap through the air, which just set you up to be punished. They're rubbish, to be honest. But yeah, it's all about punches, all about kicks. All the characters, they play fairly similar. Like, they've got different moves, and they've got different speeds and different powers and things, but compared to something like a Street Fighter, where you've got, a Ryu is as far away from Zangief or from E Honda as you can get, Virtua Fighter, you can grab any character, and you can kind of work out what's going on pretty fast. And to me, that's one of the positives of it. So there's kind of a great story attached to the launch of Sega Saturn Virtua Fighter. It was a launch game in Japan and in the West. When the Sega Saturn was launched in Japan, it launched with only 2 games, which is absolutely stupid. It launched with Virtua Fighter, and it launched with One Chai Connection, which was like a detective game where you played a detective in Hong Kong trying to solve some crime. And I don't think that ever came to the West. It might have, but Virtua Fighter was the game, and it sold an almost 1-to-1 ratio, consoles to games. But it makes sense. There's only 2 games available, but almost everybody that bought a Saturn bought Virtua Fighter. The console was also supposed to launch with Panzer Dragoon and one other game. I can't think what the other game was, but they just weren't ready in time, so they launched it anyway, and everybody bought it for Virtua Fighter. So when they started talking about bringing the Saturn to the US, 6 months after it had come out in Japan, they announced a release date for it in the US. They were going to release it in September, and they announced this, and then the very first E3 came around, which I guess was in May or June. That's what it is now. And the big guy from Sega got up on the stage. This is the very first E3. Big. It's E3 it's a show for retailers. We look at it now as game developers release trailers and things, but it's a trade show. It's where all the big retailers go to look at what they're going to stock for the next year. So the very first E3, big guy from Sega gets up on stage. He announces that the console is going to cost $399, which is really expensive at the time. Really expensive. It was going to come packed in with Virtua Fighter, which is nice. That's exciting. But he also announces that they've scrapped the release date that they initially announced, and it was going to release that day in a select 4 retailers. They announced that they'd shipped 300,000 units to 4 retailers in the US, and it was just available then and there. It's out now. Surprise, it's out 6 months early. The reaction to this was that every other retailer in the US just absolutely flipped their lid, and some of them refused to stock the Saturn. The others just gave no placement to it at all. And Sega had done this to preempt the PlayStation. Basically, the PlayStation, there was rumours it was going to come out earlier than the Saturn. Everyone was a lot more excited by it. And Sega were crapping themselves, to be honest. So they would just try to rush it to market to get it out first, and it just completely backfired. Later on in the day, or maybe the day after, I don't know the timeline, Sony were having their conference at E3 to talk about the PlayStation and the upcoming launch. And their response to Sega announcing the $399 price point and the immediate release, their response was...
$299.
For the Sony America president to walk up on stage to his big round of applause, he walks up, puts his notes down, he leans towards the microphone and said $299, and then walked off. And the crowd just exploded, and that was it. That was the nail in the coffin. The PlayStation destroyed the Saturn. It was $100 cheaper. It was more powerful. It had all the games that everybody wanted to play, and the rest is history. Now, that doesn't mean that the Saturn was rubbish. I absolutely love the Sega Saturn. It's just that story is brilliant. Like, in the history of kind of mistakes and interesting things involving, platform releases, the Saturn, it's out now story is it's huge. It's a big one. So anyway, Virtua Fighter launched with the Saturn in America. That's how Virtua Fighter is linked to that story. As in Japan, it was a launch game, and it wasn't as notable in America as it was in Japan. Like in the West, Virtua Fighter was nowhere near as big, mainly because our arcade scene's just like nothing compared to the one in Japan. So it sold nowhere near as well. And plus the PlayStation launched with Tekken and Battle Arena Toshinden, which just looked miles better, they performed better, they had more characters. It just didn't do so well. But it's a classic. They quickly followed it up with other Virtua Fighter games, and they righted the ship, and it's remembered as it's one of the great fighting games. They don't really make it anymore, much to my frustration. They haven't made a Virtua Fighter game for absolutely ages. But the classics, they still exist. We can still play them. We can still enjoy them. And I certainly still enjoy this. So here we're looking at Pi versus Jeffrey. And you know, when I was talking about how a lot of the characters, they all kind of control the same, or not the same, but quite similar. I think this is just one of the big examples. Jeffrey is one of the big, slow, powerful guys in the game, you know, like a Zangief or an E-Honda, to compare it to a Street Fighter analogy. And Pai is the Chun-Li, you know, is the Chinese girl. She's fast, she's got quick combos, but, I mean, you look at their fighting styles together, they've got very similar combos. You can see it as a positive or a negative. The positive is it's very accessible. You don't need to know loads of special moves because there aren't any special moves. The moves in Virtua Fighter are combos basically. It's punch, punch, kick, or it's forward and kick, or it's back and punch. You know, they're not. You're not doing quarter circles on the control stick, and you're not holding back for 2 seconds and then pressing forward and punch. You're just doing combinations of button presses, which means that you can kind of button bash your way through it. And I think that's a valid tactic for beginners in Virtua Fighter. You just kind of hammer out combos and try and react to what your character's doing. And again, that could be an advantage or a disadvantage depending on your viewpoint. It's certainly different to something like Street Fighter. And I only can keep comparing this to Street Fighter because that was the daddy at the time. Virtua Fighter came out as the first polygonal fighting game. We didn't have Tekken yet. We didn't have Toshinden yet. And it played completely different. It was slower. It had kind of more deliberate animations. It's just a totally different game, and it kind of revolutionised fighting games in a lot of ways. It didn't mean that 2D fighting games didn't exist anymore, but it did bring something new to the table, and it kind of gave a path for 3D fighters in the future, which we're still on today. So I've got to admit, I have pronounced Kage's name as Cage for my entire life. Since playing Virtua Fighter as a kid, getting my Saturn, playing Virtua Fighter all through my life, just knew him as Cage, as you would if you were a child in Britain. That says Cage. And it was only as I plugged in my Saturn to start recording this footage, I was looking at him thinking, yeah, he's from Japan. It says on his character select screen he's Japanese. He's this ninja. His name's definitely Kage. It's not Cage. So I looked it up, and obviously everyone agrees because it's the truth. His name is Kage. But it's gonna take some. It's going to take some getting used to not calling him Cage, because that's clearly what his name is. So that's Virtua Fighter. Virtua Fighter 1. Short and sweet, but it's a short and sweet game. It's got 8 characters. It's got 2 modes. It's got an arcade mode and a versus mode. It's pretty basic, and I think the most interesting things about the game is number 1, its legacy, and you know what it led to, and number 2, the story about its stupid release and the stupid release of the Sega Saturn, and we've covered those. But yeah, remember these visuals because they're going to change massively within one game. They're going to improve massively, I would say. The style remains; they don't change, but they certainly improve. And maybe we'll keep looking back to Virtua Fighter 1 as we look at future Virtua Fighters and see how far it came. But thank you for joining me for the inaugural episode of all of the Virtua Fighters. I can't wait to get stuck into this series because I've absolutely loved doing the Street Fighter series. I'm still loving doing it, and I just want to play more fighting games because they're the best. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the future for another all of the Virtua Fighters. Okay, bye.